Hey there, spacers. Welcome back to another episode of the Space Revolution. My name is Rick Tumlinson. We are on iRock Space Radio. We're part of the iHeartRadio network, and God bless them, everyone. Today, we have a great guest, an old and very deep friend of mine, Sagi Kfir. Now, I want to say, by way of full disclosure, like I said, he's a good friend of mine. He works with me a bit on Space Fund, other projects I've done, and so that's my disclosure, and that's all I'm going to say about it. So right now we're just going to start diving in here, but I do want to say this about Sagi. Sagi has a great background in law and policy. That's his expertise. He is very well known in the space field. He started his education back at Johns Hopkins, got a BA in International Relations, and University of Miami, graduated cum laude, and all that other fancy stuff. And we're just going to have fun today, Sagi. So anyway, since then,
Rick, can I say how great it is to be on your show, by the way?
no, you can't.
How excited I am to be on your show. It's been a while since
you can't say any of that.
since we've talked about this, so I'm excited to be on.
Just put it away. I'm not done introducing you, okay?
Okay.
Do you mind? All right, thank you. Just kidding. So anyway, I have a couple of guilt points here. I'm kind of one of the people that helped drag Sagi into the field a little bit. We can talk about that later. But he joined us at a company called Deep Space Industries, which was one of the two asteroid mining companies you've heard me talk about before, along with Planetary Resources back in the 2012, 2013 period. Since then, as I mentioned, he's worked with me at Space Fund. But during that period also, because of his outstanding work in international space law and policy, Sagi ended up being the chairman of the U.S. Bar Association's
American Bar Association, ABA.
American Bar Association Space Law Committee, which he handed away without a struggle at the end of his term. And again, Sagi is so well respected in the field, and one of the great characters, I think, that has helped us start developing a global space policy framework that is going to enable the opening of the frontier. So, Sagi, again, welcome, my friend. As the audience
Great
knows,
to be on.
we're just going to we're going to relax. We're going to hang and have some fun here, but there's a lot of serious topics we're going to cover regarding space law and policy. The last job that you just finished a little while ago, before you became an indie, an independent, a gig worker, as they might say, was working for this guy that had the bookstore, Jeff Bezos, at Blue Origin. So let's talk about that. What were you doing for Blue Origin?
Yeah, thanks, Rick. And like I said, thrilled to be on. It's been a while since we've been talking about our fireside chat and how much we've wanted to do that. What did I do at Blue Origin? I did a lot of things at Blue Origin. Primarily, I was the head of the regulatory and compliance for the company. So when I came in, they didn't have a designated regulatory and compliance attorney. I came in, started up that role, built up a team, and we worked on regulatory and compliance for a large aerospace company. And as you can imagine, there's a lot of things to do on regulatory compliance. So regulatory compliance regarding actual space stuff, FAA launch, dealing with OSHA and EPA compliance, other federal requirements, and also building compliance programs for internally within the organization. Not just on federal programs, but also state and local regulations, and even started taking a look at different things in terms of certificate compliance with like AS 9100 and even contractual compliance. There's a lot to do there, as you can imagine.
So we have a wide ranging audience, including international. So OSHA stands for
OSHA stands for, oh gosh, can we
what?
edit this right now?
Occupational Safety and
Occupational Safety Hazard Administration, yes.
oh, yeah, or health.
And EPA, the
Oh yeah,
Environmental Protection
right,
Administration.
right. And we won't get into the numbered stuff you just rattled off because like we're just lost.
Yes, yes,
Okay,
there's a lot.
but you're doing a lot of compliance and how a space company operates within a legal framework in the United States, basically, is what you were focused on.
Yeah, there's, a lot of people think that, or I've read this in many different pieces of media, that the US commercial space industry is unregulated. It's not, it's very well regulated. I think some people are confused that there's a moratorium period that's actually sunsetting, supposedly, this October, after years and years of the FAA not necessarily being able to regulate human flight safety to the fullest. They do regulate some aspects to it. Um, so, um, so I don't know. I forgot. We got to edit that. What were we
We're
beginning
not
to talk
editing
about?
that, dude. We're going straight through. So you are you're working on this compliance, and we are dealing, with an industry that's growing, an industry
Mhm.
that's relatively young, and in my experience, knowing the original lady at the Space Transportation Administration under the FAA, who we lost a few years ago, but
Mhm.
there's George Neild, who recently retired. Those people working really hard to try and stay up with what was happening in the new space
Yeah.
industry,
Mhm.
and so you find yourself here, or found yourself there, with Blue Origin, working from the company side with the government, trying to figure things out like where we can launch, when we can launch, what are our liability challenges, both for people we're carrying and the areas we're flying over, these kinds of things. Isn't that right?
Yeah, amongst other things, absolutely. Especially when you're talking about, I spent a lot of time on the FAA license and the FAA license, making sure that we got the FAA license for the New Shepard rocket, right? Way back
Uh-huh.
when, this is the summer of 21, to make sure that license was issued to make sure that Jeff Bezos, his brother, and a couple of others were able to take off in July of 21. That encompasses a lot of work, a lot of activity. That is less regular. There are regulatory aspects, but also the day-to-day licensing activities within the company to make sure that you meet all of those requirements in the regulation. So there's a lot of technical people working at Blue to make sure that happens. I was a little bit of that go-between between FAA and Blue to make sure that FAA interpreted that material correctly, that they didn't overreach in their regulatory um, allowance,
Mm-hmm.
because and I think the people at FAA generally do a fantastic job, but the government has a way, government agencies have a way sometimes I don't think it's nefarious, but sometimes they have a way of overreach on regulatory requirements. So it is important that an attorney sits in the room, especially in this nascent industry. Like you said, this is a new industry, so it's new for the FAA generally as the commercial licensing builds up, and it's also fairly new for these commercial launch companies. So not that it's nefarious, but many times that people in the FAA would overreach and request or demand things that weren't in the regulations, and they didn't have the jurisdiction to ask for those things. So you'd have a person like myself, an attorney in the room, making sure that these things went smoothly back and forth.
So if I let's say I'm Jeff Bezos Mark II, right? And I've decided I'm going to fly me a rocket ship, right? And I'm going to put some people on my rocket ship, and we're going to go up to the edge of space. By the way, Jeff doesn't sound anything like that.
He doesn't.
He doesn't, not at all,
He
not
doesn't.
at all. Maybe some of the neighbors, which is where I live, but what am I looking out for? What are my major concerns when it comes to following the laws? If I'm going to do that, and let's take it into two parts. And as you know, the audience doesn't. I worked with the Texas Space Alliance in
Mm-hmm.
2011
Mm-hmm.
with Blue Origin here in the capital in Austin, and we helped pass the liability law that allowed them to be protected in terms of lawsuits regarding uh,
Mm-hmm.
any issues regarding the
Mm-hmm.
people they're carrying, what NASA calls spaceflight participants.
Mm-hmm.
But let's start with the outside. I'm flying a rocket. What do I got to worry about in terms of safety and regulatory environment? And in my neighborhood, in the area, what am I looking for?
Yeah.
What is the government looking for to protect people from?
Yeah, so the FAA has a regulatory requirement, a statutory requirement, excuse me,
Mm-hmm.
to make sure that they protect the uninvolved public, innocent third parties
Okay.
around the area. Like that's first and foremost. Actually, let me take a step back. The FAA, especially we're talking about one particular office, it's called FAAST. That's their acronym. And why AST stands for the Office of Commercial Transportation, I'm not sure, but that's their designation. So FAAST, the Office of Commercial Transportation, has two statutory responsibilities. Number one is to make sure that commercial space launch is safe for the uninvolved public, to protect the innocent public. The other is to promote and encourage commercial space activities. They've got dual use, or not dual use, but dual requirements in terms of what they're out there. Let's leave the promotion of commercial space activities aside from now.
Okay.
And I'd be happy to talk about whether they actually do that or not. But in terms of flight safety, so there are a number of regulations that commercial space launch companies have to follow in the code the USC, the United States Code, and that code, those statutes fall into regulations, and those regulations are generally within the FAR Part 400. So there's a bunch of different regulations. Some of those regulations include, in terms of licensing, includes the review of FAA to make sure that that the testing of these rockets, right, these launch vehicles, that the company has sufficiently tested them that they can ensure an area of safety around the launch within different contours and different degrees, right? So they check all sorts of data. There's weekly meetings. They look at issues with engines or with the rocket itself. The company has to perform tests and experimental tests and make sure that they do some preconditions before the FAA will issue the license. I'm being very, very broad here. It also includes the FAA's responsibility to ensure that the companies abide by financial responsibility obligations. Do they have insurance? They have to have insurance for third-party damages and third-party liabilities. Do they have insurance to cover government property and damage to government property? If they don't have insurance, are they self-insured? But you can't just necessarily be self-insured because you want to be self-insured. The FAA has all these requirements on how to be self-insured, and they don't make it easy. They absolutely don't make it easy. So they'll check your insurance requirements. They'll check your flight data. They'll check whether you have certain systems in the vehicle, such as fire suppressant, environmental controls, for the people that are actually on the flight. And that takes a lot of time. That takes an exorbitant amount of time, years actually, to go back and forth, because they are very detailed in their review, and they also have to make sure that they're the ones there that protect the United States in terms of also its international obligations. So any of these launches, do they violate any international obligations? So they bring a whole bunch of different parties in the government to ensure that all these things are abided. So let's say you have a payload review as well. So we launch a payload. They bring in, the FAA has a proverbial roundtable, and they bring in the Department of State and NASA and Department of Defense and all these people to make sure that none of these launches violate any international treaty, or national security issues are going to be jeopardized, or any issues for NASA and the International Space Station. So the FAA directly licenses and also brings together, it serves as a body to bring together other agencies to make sure that these particular commercial launches don't violate or jeopardize any other things that those agencies are involved with or are responsible for. I'm giving you a very broad stroke of what the FAA does, but those are some of the tidbits that keep compliance attorneys and commercial launch companies busy pretty much every week.
Oh yeah, and I'm aware of the kind of work that you guys do and the FAA, and it's there is a lot of regulation. There is a lot of back and forth between the government and the private
Absolutely.
sector, and the public, I don't think, gets that enough. But look, we're going to come back in a minute and talk about some other areas of law and policy. And
can I just jump in 1 second, Rick?
you may.
There's one more point there in
Go ahead.
terms of it promoting and encouraging commercial space launch or commercial space industry. That is their statutory obligation. But if you ask anybody in the FAA, what do you really do to promote and encourage the commercial space industry as your statutory obligation, as Congress told you to do? I think they would be a little bit muffled in terms of the response. I think there would be some hemming and hawing. I'm not 100% sure how they do that. They used to have, once upon a time, and I was involved in this, the commercial wings, the commercial astronaut wings. They had a program where any spaceflight participant and crew that goes into space on a commercial vehicle will get commercial. They killed that off, I think it was last year. So they gave a couple of those wings, and that was done. And I think that's what they felt as though they were abiding by their statutory obligation of encouraging and promoting the commercial space industry. I'm not sure what they do in terms of that part of their statutory obligation. It would be a great question to ask the FAA one day.
Well, we'll come back and talk a little more about that, because I want to dive a little bit into that. All right, spacers. You're listening to iRock Space Radio. My name is Rick Tomlinson, and we're a part of the iHeartRadio network. Our guest is Sagi Kfir, and we're going to be back in a minute. Welcome back, spacers. You are listening to iRock Space Radio. My name is Rick Tomlinson. It is the space revolution, and you are right here in the middle of it. Our guest today is Sagi Kfir, space policy expert, space attorney. We've just been talking about some of the ins and outs of the regulatory environment of people being able to fly into space on private commercial spacecraft. And I know, look, it's like, oh, shoot me in the head, not regulatory, oh, not the government, whatever. Oh my God. But you know what? It keeps you alive, keeps other people alive. And we've seen in the past year some issues with safety and things like that in other areas. And so this is an important area. We need to make sure that people understand, that the work is going on, that there is a relationship between the government and the private sector to make sure the space is safe. And B, that because it's a new realm, a new activity, that people are learning all the time, and we're getting better and better at it. And C, we're going to try and use a few less acronyms in this part of the show, and try and get our agencies and our administrations right. But so look, Sagi,
hold on, Rick. I need to get my cheat sheet of all the acronyms for the regulatory agencies that I deal with. All right.
oh, good
Okay. So
gosh. All right,
let me
man.
get it out here.
Put that away. I swear to God, I'll cut your mic if you start reading off the acronyms, man. No, seriously. I think it is important again, and I want to touch on that. That I'm going to talk about two things, and then we'll get into some other. We'll leave orbit, or we'll go to orbit, and but the two quickly, and let's kind of keep this short and abbreviated. But the idea that there is a real set of regulations and policies being developed to make sure that the people inside, the people who are buying the rides, and again, something else I did many years ago after flying Dennis Tito, I was working on because NASA made such a terrific bungle out of dealing with that. They tried to like not help him fly. Dennis Tito being the guy we signed up to be the first person to fly to the space station. That afterwards they were like, well, we don't want to screw it up, but we need, and so we did a bunch of phone calls and I gave him some advice, and because there was a guy named Lance Bass from NSYNC who was trying to fly at that point, and it was kind of funny because we gave them all these particular names to what to call these people, and they ended up with the most bureaucratic name you could ever come up with: spaceflight participants. Not exciting, but very government-like. Anyway, the idea is to protect space flight participants, and there is real work going on there, right? This isn't the Wild West, is it, Sagi?
You know, it's not the Wild West. I've heard that term, the Wild West, many times, and it makes my eyes roll back into my head every time because, and look, understandably, one person uses in the media the catchphrase Wild West because it sounds sensational and it grabs people's attention. Oh, you know, all these rocket companies are sending people out to space and they don't really care about their safety. If they didn't care about their safety, then they wouldn't really have a commercial business model, right? Like if people get hurt, people are not going to fly. They do their utmost to make sure that these rockets are absolutely as safe as possible with the technology that we understand today. Like you said, it's a nascent industry. We are just opening our eyes, like in terms of the span and the history of human history, right? In terms of time, our commercial space flights in terms of that overall human, it's not even a fraction point. So there's a lot of learning to do, but at the same time, there are a number of regulations. And by the way, it's not just FAA that regulates commercial space flight or space activities. You also have the FCC regulating space activities when you want to put satellites into space that are communication. You've got NOAA regulating space activity. So FAA is not the only one. They're the ones primarily tasked with the safety aspect as well.
Mm-hmm. So let's rise up a little bit and move out into orbit. You know, there's a lot of talk lately about orbital debris and, you know, trashing space around the planet.
That's a big topic. That's
huge a big topic, man.
Yeah.
You know what? I'm not even going to ask you a question. What are your thoughts about that?
Look, I mean, yeah, it's in many ways. I'm gonna editorialize here a little bit. In many ways, how we've treated space in terms of what that looks like now with the number of orbital debris issues that we have, and just terms of the number of pieces of debris, it's upward of 500,000 pieces, maybe even more. And that's in the last 60 years, right? Plus or minus. How we treat space is in many ways reflective of us as a species on how we treat each other and the earth in general. So I think this is a good wake-up call for us to act consciously in everything we do. Now that I'm done editorializing, let's talk about space in particular. It is and is going to continue to grow as a problem for commercial space activities, right? You've got a number of different players that are coming up in the field that see a business opportunity here to clean up space, and I hope they're very successful. But you've got 500,000 pieces of debris and more circulating around Earth's orbit. And now we're also increasing the number of satellites that are going to be operational in space. I think something like 5 years ago, there was 1,000 plus, or maybe, I don't remember the exact time, there's 1,200 satellites that are active now. It's close to 10,000, and that number is going to grow. So this is a major concern because our great national security assets, such as GPS, that help out not just the United States, but people all over the world. Airplanes rely on GPS, cars rely on GPS, your phone relies on GPS. Those all stand to potentially get damaged by the number of pieces of debris. So we have to act a lot more responsibly. So once upon a time, the guideline was your asset in space, or whatever you had in space, shouldn't be hanging around for more than 25 years. That was kind of the ground rule. Now the FCC, in order to get a license, an FCC license, right? If you want to send out a communication satellite, the FCC has to license you. Their requirement is that it cannot linger in space for greater than 5 years after its useful period. So there is now conscious thinking about how do we mitigate that, both from an operational perspective, and now what do you do with the actual pieces that are in space? I mean, we're talking about pieces that are the size of a nail to spent rockets, second stage spent rockets. So the sizes are very very different, from minuscule to fairly large. But there could be money and opportunities to clean up that debris. And what do you do with that debris? Do you bring it down? Do you bring it back down to Earth and let it deorbit and burn in the atmosphere? There's all sorts of environmental questions of whether we should do that. Do you leave that in space and use it for something else? Reuse, right? Recycle, reuse in space? Well, then there's all sorts of jurisdictional and legal questions on how you do that. So I'm very optimistic because human beings are very creative and intelligent beings, that if they focus their activities in a positive way, they can do something positive. I think this is one example of where we can utilize a lot of those pieces of debris, not all of those pieces of debris, but we can utilize them and repurpose them for something that we can use in space. Lifting things into space is expensive. So if it's already there, why not use it? We've got all these legal and jurisdictional issues that we have to work through.
Yeah, I mean, as you know, my Earthlight nonprofit, one of our mantras is recycle, repurpose, reuse, and resources.
Yeah.
And we're going to get to that fourth one in the next section here. But the idea of never throwing anything away, and by the way, it's a model we need down here, right? It's almost like we have, as you said very, very well at the beginning of your answer, we are carrying the way we have operated down here up there. Throw away, disposable society, trash it, fill your, whatever, just get rid of it, throw it out the window, whatever. But in this case, we're almost hemming ourselves in terms of the debris, the danger. My God, man, we got to take care of Sarah Bullock, right? Or Sandra Bullock, right? Okay, that's a reference to that.
Yeah, and let's not forget these pieces of debris are traveling at 17,500 miles an hour, right? Like one little flake that's the size of a nail can go right through the International Space Station. I mean, that's potential harm and danger for our astronauts, and that'll be a potential harm and danger for commercial space stations that are going to be set up in the next 10 years. And
So
you've
there
got
are
private individuals.
so there are people that are looking at, and we'll probably get one or two of them on at some point, the idea of salvaging, these large pieces before they get broken up and
Mm-hmm.
turned into little pieces. That's the source, the core, of a lot of the problem. Um, but into the old outer space treaty or whatever, the nation that launched that piece is still responsible for it forever.
Mm-hmm.
There's no law, right? There's no law. Like if I have an upper stage to a rocket and I've flown up there and I've done it or whatever, and hopefully we'll be getting rid of that type of thing. But there's no way for me to hand it. I can't like say, "Hey, Sagi, I'm done with this. I'm going to hand it to you so you can recycle it." There's no way to do that, right? Currently.
People haven't done that because of all these unanswered questions, whether it's jurisdictional or more importantly, in terms of financial responsibility. If you hand it off to somebody else, are you still liable if something happens with that piece of debris, no matter what the other person does with that?
Mhm.
So there could be ways of mitigating. People have looked at this, how to mitigate this. Do you sign indemnification agreements? Do you have financial responsibility agreements, that people have to sign contractually? How do you get the government to sign off? Because don't forget, the government is financially responsible. It's not the individual companies that are financially responsible under international law. It's the government that are responsible for anything that happens with these pieces of debris that may impact either a separate government or a different nation's assets in space, or a different nation's private company's assets in space. So while companies, like let's say, company X that has a second stage rocket that's up there and says, "Hey, I don't need it. I'm not using it." There's another company that wants to recycle it. Go ahead and have at it. That doesn't relinquish the U.S. Let's say this is a U.S. company. That doesn't relinquish the U.S. government's financial responsibility under international law in the event that this recycling NUCO does something wrong, right? So the
So
U.S. government is going to be
yeah.
interested in, what are you guys doing? How are you guys doing that? They're going to want to know, because ultimately they're going to be financially responsible if something wrong or something bad goes on.
I mean, it gets very complex, right? Because let's say, so if I had a ship and I have an American company and I'm done with my ship, right? I'm done with it. It's whatever, and I want to sell it to somebody in Brazil, and from Brazil, and they're
Mm-hmm.
going to operate it in international waters or whatever. Um, it's theirs at that point, free and clear, right? We signed the title. We're done. If that ship runs into another ship, Brazil isn't responsible. So that promotes a lot of salvage. It promotes the idea that people can go in and say, okay, you're done with this. I'm going to take it and do something useful with it now. You're saying
Mm-hmm.
to me that in space, you can't do that yet.
It's more difficult to do that because now you have to have the government, whatever government was involved in the launch. And by the way, here's another little tidbit for you. It's not one government. There could be several different governments that are considered the launching state. For example, let's say I've got a rocket that I'm going to launch from, um, I'm just throwing this out there as a hypothetical, Colombia. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even think Colombia has any launch facilities. But let's say I'm launching from Colombia, but I'm an American company. There could be two different launching states under international law. It could be the one that procured the launch, and it could be the one where the actual launch took place. So now, theoretically, this piece of debris could have two different nations that are financially responsible if something goes wrong. So now how do you start coordinating that?
It's
So
no.
it becomes more and more complex. I'm not saying that this is not solvable. There are ways to solve this. People have been thinking about this, but because it's never been done before, it's the growing pains, it's the learning curve that we've got to go through. And these are the questions that we need to ask. These are the discussions that we need to have, both from the commercial side and from governments involved. And I know a lot of people have talked about having the UN get involved in this discussion and figuring out jurisdictional issues and financial responsibility. That may or may not be useful. The UN is still debating after 40 plus years, the delimitation of space. Where does space begin? And we still don't have an answer for that. So I don't know if the UN is the appropriate body, and there's definitely work to do, but there are solutions.
Right, and it is an international problem. We need an international solution, and maybe it comes out of the insurance companies working with the space companies, who then take a package to you and say, "Hey, just sign this" or something. But the goal has to be to clean it up, and that's critical. So, all right, we're going to be right back in a minute. We're going to continue this fascinating discussion. I hope it's as enlightening to you as it is to me. With Sagi Kfir, you are listening to iRock Space Radio. We're part of the iHeartRadio network. My name is Rick Tomlinson, and we are in the middle of the space revolution. My fellow space cadets, spacers, welcome back. This is the Space Revolution. My name is Rick Tomlinson. You are listening to iRock Space Radio, part of the iHeartRadio network, and we are talking to Sagi Kfir here on the Space Revolution. So we were talking about orbital debris. Now we're going to keep moving out, because we started with people getting onto spaceships, going up and down. Then we went to the orbit. Now we're going to go out. Many years ago, you and I were partners and friends and working together with an amazing team with a company called Deep Space Industries. And our goal was to harvest the resources of space. In other words, we were going to mine asteroids as our first mission. You were part of our team because of your expertise and brilliance in terms of discussing these issues. And, you know, I remember you might have been there with me. We were talking to like an investor. And again, that whole Wild West thing, right? We're all going out there. It's going to get crazy out there, and all of that. And I remember this investor saying, I need law. I need law out there, because I need to know if you guys, he said, I know you guys have the technology. I know you can figure it out. I know you're going to be able to get the resources. I just need to know that once you have them, they're mine legally.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think we were like sitting in a hotel lounge or something with somebody. But that was the deal, right? I mean, it's like, talk to us about that. Talk about the idea of like space resources and what that means in terms of having to have law.
I remember that conversation that we had at the hotel. This was back in, I think, 2013, if I'm not mistaken. This was in San Jose. And you remember quite well that one of the first three questions that potential investors asked us when we were talking about, we were going to do asteroid mining. I remember after they got over the shock effect of, what do you mean, like Bruce Willis in Armageddon? After we got over that little hurdle, I remember one of the top three questions, it was always top three, was, what are the laws that will protect my investment to make sure that we will own and have the ability to properly dispose of that asset in any which way we wanted? And at that time, there was nothing. I mean, there was absolutely nothing. And then when we started socializing that, it was us, and there was a lot of good work also done by Planetary Resources at the time. We both did it together, separately, but together. We were both talking to the White House and to Congress and to other agencies within the federal government. And we were basically saying, hey, look, under international law, under the Outer Space Treaty, there's nothing there that clearly and explicitly prohibits that kind of activity. That was our position. And while some academics and maybe certain countries in the world, for geopolitical reasons, believe that we were not allowed under international law to commercialize space resources, that's a separate topic we could talk about. I think that had a lot to do with their competition of the United States and against American companies. So they wanted to slow the U.S. and U.S. companies as much as possible. Some believed that it wasn't legal. The majority believed it was legal. But there was nothing under international law that, especially the Outer Space Treaty, that said that it was explicitly illegal. So under international law, a nation has the right to interpret international treaties when there is a gray area or something that is not explicitly stated. So when we educated both Congress, Senate, the House, and the White House in terms of why we needed this law to provide a certain amount of, a minimum amount of certainty for investors and for ourselves in order to grow this industry. There was some pushback, but generally people were interested in the government in helping out this nascent industry. And it took us it was about 3-4 years until that first law passed in the United States. If I'm not mistaken, it was November 25th of 2015. It was Title IV of the Commercial Space Launch Competitiveness Act. And that's when it became legal for U.S. persons, and a U.S. person is also a corporation, to go out and to actively explore and use these resources. However, we didn't get any real property rights from that. It was only personal property rights that were granted by the U.S. government. So just like, for example, a American fishing trawler that goes out into international water, they're claiming when they go fishing, they pick up the fish. That's personal property, but they're not claiming the right to that part of the ocean. Similarly, the law explicitly says that you can claim the resources once you extract it from the asteroid, but you can't claim the asteroid itself. And that was the first time in world history that a law like that provided that type of ability. And Luxembourg looked at that and they refined that, and they expounded on their laws to do that, and then UAE and Japan did the same. There's one little caveat here, though.
Uh-oh.
Got to get this, and most people don't realize this. Even with that law back in 2015, we're now talking almost 8 years ago, a U.S. company that's doing asteroid mining, or we like to say space resource utilization. Asteroid mining sounds dirty. Space resource utilization activities. If they want to go and do that now, and they actually want to go and scrape some rocks off of an asteroid, they actually cannot.
Pray tell why, Sagi?
And I'll tell you why. That's a good question, Rick. Thanks for asking. Because Title IV of the Commercial Space Launch Competitiveness Act is a page. It's less than a page if you look at the margins and take out the preambles and all the fluffy stuff. It's less than a page. The law is less than a page. There are no details on which federal agency has the authority to authorize and continually supervise the activities of that space resource company. That is a requirement under Article 6 of the Outer Space Treaty. And that requirement flows down to national legislation. The nation has to make sure that they abide by that international treaty, that there's a federal agency that authorizes and continues to supervise that activity, like the FCC does with communication satellites, like NOAA does with Earth observation satellites. So there is no federal agency that has that, what we call mission authorization to do that. We're still waiting for that to happen.
Do you know if anybody's working on that now?
They are absolutely. They've been working on that for many years. The National Space Council has been working on that for a number of years. You've got Diane Howard, who's a good friend, exceptional person, exceptional attorney. She's the director of commercial policy in the National Space Council. And she's been working along with her team and others on a mission authorization. And it's not just for space resource activity. You're talking about all non-traditional space activities, right? Traditional space activities, communication satellites in geosynchronous orbits, satellites in LEO. We're talking about non-traditional space activities, space mining, on-orbit servicing, lunar activities, commercial space station. All of those non-traditional space activities don't have a federal agency that is designated to authorize and continually supervise. So the National Space Council is working on that. Where they are today, I'm not sure. They had a number of meetings last year about it. There was a notice in the Federal Register that they're working on it, and noticed those meetings. I think there were about 3 meetings altogether. Where they are today with it and when that's going to be released, I'm not quite sure.
Mm-hmm. Interesting, right? So again, I just really, really, really want the listeners, our fellow spacers, to get this so they can tell other people, not the Wild West.
Absolutely not the Wild West.
It is not. There are so many people working on this, so many people who want this to be done the right way. Now, go ahead.
Well, can I add one more piece to that?
You may,
And
sir.
just to put the nail on the coffin of this Wild West fiasco that I hear about. Before any American company can launch into space, we were talking about the FAA. The FAA is the one that provides the launch license. They know what payloads are going up. So you can't, an American company just can't get on a SpaceX or ULA or hopefully, in very short order, Blue Origin with their New Glenn rocket. They can't just go beyond Earth's orbit and do whatever they want, or even in Earth's orbit. The FAA, and I was talking about this a little bit, they have a proverbial roundtable. They do a payload review and a launch review. Before any payload or any launch goes up, they bring all of these different agencies to the table: Department of State, Department of Defense, NASA, and others. And each one of them has a veto. And if they don't believe that this company is going to, or this particular activity will abide by regulations or international law or jeopardizes something that's of the interest of the United States, the FAA won't allow that launch. So you can't just get on a rocket when you want to get on a rocket and do your activity. Those are heavily scrutinized and licensed by the FAA.
Very important for people to know. So we've done all of that. I want to wrap this segment up, and then we're going to talk a little bit about your journey and the traditional questions I like to ask my guests in the next section. But if I want to go, let's say when Starship flies, or New Glenn from Blue Origin, or whoever, Firefly, or whoever it is I ride up there with, right? And I go to the moon. Do you believe there will come a time when a person like me or you, or somebody listening, can go up there and head out from wherever they land, go out to a place, stake out 10 acres, let's say, and then say, this is my land. This is my family's land. I'm going to develop it. I'm going to build on it. In my world, I'd put a dome and put some trees, and I would make it green, and it would be beautiful. Probably a crater, right? I love that idea of a domed crater. And I've got life in there, and it's beautiful, and all of that. I want to be able to give it to my children and my children's children. Do you believe there'll come a time where that's possible?
I think if you look at the history of humanity, in terms of all the migration activities throughout time, it was impossible for humans to move to another place without having a certain amount of security, to know that they can create a home for themselves and their family. I find it hard to believe that that won't be the reality sometime in the future. That being said, that being said, we have Article 2 of the Outer Space Treaty.
Mm-hmm.
And Article 2 of the Outer Space Treaty, which the United States is a party to, and most nations are a party to, and you can even say now it's become common international law, right? Um, that Article 2 basically says there shall be no and I'm paraphrasing, there's no appropriation of any celestial body by use or force or any other means. In other words, just like we were dealing with primarily when we passed the Commercial Space Launch Competitiveness Act to allow asteroid mining back in 2015, the main issue was, are you going to claim real property rights? Are you going to claim a part of a celestial body, whether it's an asteroid, the moon, the Mars, whatever? And right now, you cannot claim any real property rights. But what you can do is you can land on a celestial body and you don't claim those rights. You don't have the right in terms of real property to say, that is my piece of land forevermore. But you do have the right to be there and to use and explore space. That's also granted in Article 1. So Article 2 doesn't trump everything. Article 1, the first article of the first space treaty in history says everyone, paraphrasing, everyone has the right to use and explore space. So how do you coalesce what seems like a contradiction between Article 1 and Article 2? And there really isn't a contradiction. You have the right to use and explore space. You have the right to go to a celestial body, land on it, and use a particular area. How you use it, how long you use it, then that's a separate topic, right? You can't harmfully interfere with activities of those that are around you, et cetera, et cetera. But as long as you're not violating those other requirements under international law, there seems to be no reason why someone can't land on a celestial body and use that particular area while they are there, effectively using it and exploring it. I just would not claim it as my own until sometime in the future where we build a critical mass and there are more and more people on the moon and on Mars, that discussion will need to be fleshed out.
So we're going to wrap up this section. I will say that, it is my belief that has to change, or you will not end up with lots of people living on the moon and Mars, because one of the reasons you go to a new place is to stake it out, to build a home for your family. One of the bastions of America in the United States is people coming over from other countries. They rent, they work their way up, and
Yeah.
then they hit it, and they hit it by owning their own home. So a lot of work to do there. We're going to wrap it up with that, because you and I could go off for an hour and a half on that one.
Mm-hmm.
It's a whole different show. We've had Michelle Hanlon on, another one of your peers. At
She's
some
great.
point, we're just going to get everybody together. I know we're going to talk about it at New Worlds here in Austin. So, all right, we are stepping away for a few moments. All right, Spacers, we're going to be back. You are listening to iRock Space Radio, part of the iHeartRadio network, with our guest, Sagi Kfir, and we will be right back. Spacers and future property owners on the moon and Mars. I'm kidding. I'm not. Welcome back to iRock Space Radio, the Space Revolution. My name is Rick Tellinson. We are talking to my esteemed peer, Esquire, as they say, Sagi Kfir, space policy and law expert. All right, we've hit a bunch of topics. As I said at the end of the last segment, we could go nuts on all of them. You and I worked on this and had some great visits to Luxembourg and UAE and all this stuff, working on this back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
There's so much to be done. So, my friend, and you're a SoCal boy, so I could say, dude. So, dude, what got you into this, man? Where did this why are you and I sitting here from your perspective? Where did Sagi Kfir get the spark to go into this field?
Dude, I was
Dude.
born that way. I know. I literally mean that. Like, a lot of people ask me this question, and I consider myself lucky. There are people involved in the space industry that have stumbled upon it, and then they get lit up by it when they learn about it, and they're really interested. And it's amazing. It's great. My mom likes to say that the second they cut the umbilical cord, all I could do was look up at the sky and point. And it's true. Like, as far as I remember, ever since I was a little kid, all I could do was, anytime there was an airplane or a helicopter, and all I wanted to do was be a pilot. Um, my parents bought me all these astronaut coloring books when I was a kid, and I would spend days on these coloring books. And then as I got older, I wanted them to buy me all these books on NASA and astronauts. And I read about Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong and all the other Apollo and Mercury and Gemini missions. And these were my idols and my heroes. So I just wanted to be a fighter pilot. I wanted to be an astronaut. And I knew I was going to get involved in aerospace one way or the other. And around 12 or 13, I come from an Israeli and a Jewish home. We just argue politics and religion all the time. It was my father and I generally, into the wee hours, we would just argue nonstop. Good argument, like really good philosophical argument. And I knew at the time, probably by 12 or 13, I was probably going into law. I enjoyed the idea of law. I enjoyed the idea of the sparring. I enjoyed the idea of justice and doing justice and things like. And then I said, well, how do I marry the law and space or aerospace? So when I got into, man, I've been doing this like the gray here is starting to show, right? I've been doing this for 20, 30 years. When I got into law school in 96, okay, in 96, there definitely were a few law schools that had a focus in space. I was at University of Miami, and I just came back from the Army. I was alive. I was happy to be alive. I wanted to stay and hang out with my friends and family, so I went to law school in Miami. There wasn't that much going on in the University of Miami School of Law for space. There was in aviation, so I took aviation, and I said, okay, I'm going to bide my time. In 96, and when I graduated in 99, and you remember in 99, there still wasn't that much going on in the commercial space industry. There was, but it was geosynchronous order, satellites and government work and things of that nature. So I was biding my time. So I dealt really with. I stayed at a lower altitude. I was lucky enough to do an internship at the Department of Justice Aviation, Space, and Maritime Litigation section because I knew I was going to be a litigator. I had a very, very, very focused agenda. I knew exactly where I wanted to go. I wanted to be a litigator. From being a litigator, I wanted to go in-house. And I saw that happening. And I went into a litigation firm in Miami that specialized in aerospace litigation. So it was a lot of aviation crash defense, a lot of contractual issues with aerospace. And then from there, I became a general counsel for a national air ambulance company based in San Diego. But I was always involved in the space world in one way or the other. You and I obviously met in space conferences, New Space, way back when,
Right.
and we stayed in touch. I stayed in touch with other people. And while I was on that aviation track, I was continuously thinking about, studying about, and being involved in the space world. And then as technology matured and things miniaturized, CubeSats started, all this democratization of space started happening, where you had a plethora of these commercial space companies that just mushroomed out of nowhere, and everybody was starting something in a garage in Silicon Valley or elsewhere. And those opportunities naturally unfolded. And then one day you called me way back when, and you asked me, I'll never forget, hey, Sagi, I'm like, hey, Rick, what's going on? He's like, you're like, nothing much. Hey, how would you like to help me start a commercial space company? And I said, let me think about it. Yes.
Yeah, I remember. Yes.
Yeah. Yes.
Right.
But in addition, as an attorney, and is what I tell a lot of
Hmm.
aspiring attorneys or attorneys that are already in the field and looking to go into space law or being involved in space, stay active. Get involved in the American Bar Association Space Law Committee. Get involved in the International Institute of Space Law. Go to these conferences. They don't have to be legal conferences. Go to space conferences, meet people, network, understand what's going on, what their needs are, have conversations. And over time, building up traction where people will see your face over and over, or publish something, you'll start getting some notoriety and some traction. And there are more positions now in the legal field in space, in commercial space, than ever existed in the 90s or early 2000 when I got involved. So this is, if you're an aspiring space attorney, and I could talk about really what a space attorney is, but if you're an aspiring attorney that wants to be involved in the space industry, now is the time.
Perfect. You actually anticipated my next question, what you would tell somebody young. As long as they don't come out of a law school and say you can't own property and we need to follow the Antarctica model, but that's a whole separate
That's a whole, yeah,
conversation.
that's a whole separate
Oh my
discussion.
gosh, I've heard so many come out of space law, different schools. It depends on the professors, and say that
Yeah,
there's
if they want to remain academics and they don't want a job in the space industry, they should say those things that you just said. But if they're looking to get involved in the space industry, then
yeah,
I think they
that's a
should
whole
broaden their
different
horizons of what the
broaden your
possibilities are.
horizon, right? So look, I'm going to do my standard questions for you just because I haven't
Oh,
asked you to
shoot, go
come on
ahead.
the thing. Yeah, it's fun, man. I kind of know where your head is on a couple of things, but so Sagi Kfir is in his little pod, cruising at several thousand clicks an hour. You're orbiting Ceres, the asteroid
Mm.
in the asteroid belt, which is famously the one that where the expanse starts.
I
Right?
would probably orbit Europa or some of the Jupiter,
You are
some
a
of the moons
lawyer,
of.
aren't you? I'm
I'm just saying some of the.
you are a fracking lawyer. I can
I'm
tell. Here
just
you
saying,
go,
but
counselor. Counselor, I
but
will
see,
accept. I will accept your amendment.
go ahead.
I will accept your amendment. You can
Okay.
orbit any fracking planet you want.
Okay. Thank
By the
you.
way, the words fracking comes from Battlestar Galactica. Thank you very much for giving us that. Um, you're orbiting Europa, several thousand clicks an hour. You can feel the motion.
Mm.
What are you listening to, my brother?
Oh, wow. Oh, that's a great question. I probably have a playlist that, that will include Radiohead
Okay.
for sure. There's definitely Radiohead involved. Um, I'm probably listening to some Tiesto. I'm getting
Oh,
jazzed up about some Tiesto. I may be even listening to In Search of Sunrise #4 for Tiesto back in 2005, probably his best double album hit. Um, so between Radiohead, Tiesto, and some of my wife's music, she's an amazing musician and
okay.
songwriter. I think those three is going to cover a fair chunk of time when I enter into Europa's atmosphere.
There you go. And I should tell our listeners that my friend Sagi here is a known burner and a Burning Man veteran of many years. So, okay. So, what is your favorite science fiction book?
I don't know if there's a favorite. I know you're looking for one. I can't say that there's a
Okay.
favorite, but I'll tell
No
you
problem.
one a series. I would say Isaac Asimov's Foundation and iRobot series was probably one of the pivotal series of books in my life when it came to thinking about human space exploration, but really humanity and what humanity will look like in the future and how will humanity interact with itself in the future. So I would say Isaac Asimov really kind of changed everything. Caveat there,
Mm-hmm.
the close second would be Cosmos by Carl Sagan. And the
Well,
Cosmos
nonfiction.
series,
Yeah, nonfiction. Yeah.
nonfiction. I think that probably was one of the most pivotal moments in my life as a kid, looking at and it's, not even the books, the series, the Cosmos series, I would say that definitely had an impact on me.
Brilliant. So, quick side note for our listeners. One of Rick's rules of entertainment and science fiction: see the movie, see the television show first, then read the book, because the show or the TV series only has parts of the book in it, and you'll have a richer experience. If you read the book first and then you go see the movie,
Yeah, I agree with you here.
like if you see like
Yeah.
the Will Smith iRobot, or you see even the I think it's Apple that's doing the Foundation trilogy right now, um, you're just going to be disappointed. The movie and the TV show is like a trailer for the book, right? And there's a lot more you're going to get out of it. And just a little side note. Um, so that's cool. I like that. Go
I
ahead.
mean, can we spend just one more minute on this?
Absolutely,
I
sir.
was thinking
Yeah.
about this the other day. Especially iRobot. I remember, and again, I haven't looked at these books in 30 years, but I
Yeah.
remember there was a part either in the iRobot or in the Foundation series where the description was everyone's got their droids, the robots, very little
Mm.
human interaction. And the way Asimov was describing it was that humans were disgusted by the thought of touching another human. The very visceral act of touching another human in the future is going to be so abhorrent to humans because we're going to have droids and robots. And why would we need? And I thought about that the other day, and I was a little concerned that there may be something to that.
Mm.
Between what's happening today and how we're developing technology, social media, and people are more involved in doing this and going inward
Mm-hmm.
into their little phones or their little pads or their computer, rather than having real interaction with other humans, right? I feel like that is dwindling, and I think COVID put an asterisk behind
Mm.
that. I feel like after COVID, people had or still have a harder time with that interaction. While we develop our technology, and we will be an interplanetary species, it's just a matter of time. We need to consciously think of how we interrelate to each other and what AI is going to look like and what these technologies are going to look like and how they will greatly facilitate our activities on a daily level and really alleviate a lot of issues that we do
Mm-hmm.
in terms of freeing up bandwidth in space, right? Or bandwidth of time. Once upon a time, people would spend a lot of time washing their clothes. You just put it into a washing machine. People just take that for granted. AI and computers are going to do that for us on a much different level. We can't forget our humanity. We can't lose our humanity.
Right.
And I think those are some of the things that I think about that concern me as we develop as a species, as we grow as a species. Sorry, that was a little bit my editorialization, but you got me thinking when I said iRobot and the
No, you
Foundation
gave us a
series.
good closer. You brought us home there, because it's about being human. It is all about being human. As we open the frontier, and it's interesting because as we go out there, we're going to come in here in a sense, in that we're going to be very intimate with people because we're going to be stuck in little places with each other. Everybody's going to have to be your best friend. Um, you know, correct?
I, and and you and I have talked a little bit about this. That is one of my major concerns. If people can't sit still with themselves for 1 minute, how many people nowadays can actually close their eyes and just be comfortable sitting still for 1 minute? That means you're agitated inside. If you're agitated inside and you can't sit still for 1 minute, I'm not even talking about an hour. I'm not even talking about half an hour, 10 minutes, 1 minute. Most people can't do that. How are you going to act and interrelate with 10 other people in a tube for 3 months long in
Right.
space?
Right. You're going to be going out the airlock. And speaking of going out the airlock, as people who listen to this show know, um, first of all, let me say thanks. Great. A lot of fun. And I know we wandered around here, but I think and I know we got a little wonky with some of the regulatory stuff there, but you've helped educate. And I think we have a fairly educated audience for this show. And great stuff, Sagi. I truly appreciate you coming aboard. And for those wonderful spacers who have made it this far into the show and have followed us so far in the series, thank you so much. And we are out the
Thanks, Rick.
airlock.